Welcome to Code Speaks. It is a series of sessions with leading industrial experts. These series are a part of pre-hack events conducted by SIAM-VIT. SIAM-VIT, the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics, is an international chapter with a populace of more than 14,000 individuals across the globe. We are a technical chapter and we dive into various domains like AI, ML, web dev, app dev, etc. And we aim to find technical solutions to all real world problems. So now coming to our hackathon, Hackulus is going to be held on 9th and 10th of April. Register yourself if you haven't registered already. If you're a beginner and or not confident enough to compete in the real world, Hackulus is just the place for you. We have a special beginners category where you'll be competing with people of your level. And don't worry for the pros. We have exciting cash prizes, internship offers, and amazing giveaways. Also, this reminds me, look out for a giveaway question and make sure to answer in the chat box. One lucky winner will be selected for the giveaway. Now, the moment you all have been waiting for. We welcome Rahul sir, who is a senior UX designer at Amazon and who will be talking about value of user experience with us. Welcome, sir.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. All right. So I have a few basic questions before we start with your session. So we'd like to know how you sort of went into design. Who promoted you to go to design, or what led you to the design industry?
So I come from a family of designers actually.
All
So
right.
it's like I'm like the fourth designer in my family. I have one other cousin brother after me who joined design as well. So it all started off from my granddad. So he's an artist. His name is Kane Ramchandran. So we have seen him painting right from our childhood. Naturally, we are all very inclined towards art, fine arts, to be more precise. But with fine arts, it requires a slightly different. It requires a slightly different kind of a skill, and then you will as a young person, you don't really want to sit at one place, paint for days together. You want a little bit of more adventure, so you kind of as a person, I started exploring what are the other things beyond art, what I can do. One of the very interesting part what I found across was advertising. So I I got into advertising, my undergraduation was in advertising. So I worked in
All
advertising
right.
for a year. So around 2010, that's the time where web. So we were not. So the term UX was not predominantly used. So when I started working in advertising, being the youngest in the group, people didn't know what to do when somebody comes and asks them to create websites. So it was called web design back then in 2008, 9, 10, in that era. We are called web
Right.
designers and we paid very, very little. So if you look at it 10 years back, so a brochure design would cost you, let's say, around a lakh to design, and a web designer would get paid lesser than 10K to design the whole website. So
Oh,
back then,
okay.
because print and so those were, was there, like preferred mediums back then, in the 2005, 6, 7, so then in 2010, web was one of the channels what they wanted to explore. So I was being the junior most in the design team there, so I was handed over all the projects to design the websites. So that's how I got interested in the domain of web designing. So then when I was doing web designing for multiple clients, multiple people in the advertising agency, I wanted to learn professionally, how do you actually do a web design thing? Because advertising, I had a degree, I
Right.
know
Right.
how to create ads and stuff. But web designing was quite interesting, and nobody had clue around. I mean, everybody around me was 10 years, 15 years into the advertising industry, and they had pretty clueless about how do you get into web and how do you do other kind of things. So that quest kind of took me to NID. They had a course called Design for Digital Experience, which was only focused on creating digital experiences. So that's
Okay.
where it kind of started off, getting into the IT UX part. Yeah.
Right. So I saw in your profile that you have done your management from IM Bangalore. So how come you went towards the management domain while continuing your design passion? How did you integrate the two, and why did you sort of choose to go into the management domain?
So as much as I love design, one of the core things, what I felt I was missing was understanding the business parts of it. And
Right,
understanding business becomes very core to what you do as a designer, because you have to have a very good understanding on the numbers. You have to have a very good understanding on people aspects of it. And when you look at a career progression, in design, I mean, in India, it is a very very new field,
correct,
unlike
correct,
US or Europe, where you have I mean, what do you call as IC designers or individual contributors, working 25 years, without becoming a manager. In India, the sad truth is that we don't really have a lot of principal designer or senior principal designers who pursue design beyond those 7, 8, 10 year experience marks. So I felt like, when you're going to manage people, you might as well learn how to do it and how to do it properly. So that's the reason
right.
behind going into the management track. And it is not a full-fledged management program. It's an executive MBA. So it's a part-time MBA, what I did. So
Okay, all right, sir. So we'll let you begin with your session on user experience, and we'll not wait any further.
yeah. So yeah, I think everybody has access to the chat, right? Like, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to post them. Probably we'll take those questions in the end. So let me begin with the intro of myself. So my name is Rahul. I'm currently working in Amazon. I take care of the seller side experiences for Amazon. So I did my undergrad from Chitrakala Parishad, which is in Bangalore. I did Bachelor of Fine Arts. I did this. As told already, I studied advertising as my major. Then I went into Sachi Sachi as a junior graphic designer. So then post graduation in NIT, then uh, ClearTrip, eBay, Microsoft, and currently in Amazon, from past 4.5 years now. So yeah, so I mean, before we get started, I mean, I would want to make the session a little bit more, keep it a little bit more interactive, and I want to break the ice, and one of the, I mean, this is one of the very interesting videos where what I've come across about design. I would like to share it with you guys before we start talking about UX and those detail aspects. Just let
When
me know
people
if you
think
guys
of
can hear
design,
it.
they often think an elegant chair, a well-turned logo, dramatic architecture. But that isn't all that design is. Design is more. It's more than the drapes or the drop shadows, more than a beautiful UI or a rad concept car. Design is more than aesthetics, much more. Design is fundamental. It's the predilection to investigate and understand. It's the compulsion to give form to ideas and make sense of disorder. Design is the ability to amend the imperfect. Design is knowing what questions to ask and how to ask them. What's the right problem to solve? How do I solve it? Why should I solve it? In a world in which anyone can now build anything, design is understanding whether something is worth building at all. If you've ever built, tested, shipped, debugged, rebuilt, or reshipped anything, then you're a designer. And there has never been a better moment in history to be a designer. Now is your time to solve real and important problems, to start great and enduring companies, to use curiosity, creativity, and craft to elevate lives. Because design at its core is optimistic. It's the call to change what is into what ought to be. It is the attempt to make heart and mind into tools of mass construction, to build a better, wiser, more just, more beautiful world. Design is your gift and your responsibility. Design is the way.
So as you guys have heard, if you guys have coded, shipped, or created something, you guys are all a designer. So there is nothing you have to learn something very specific to become a designer. I think everybody have that core skill built in. It is just that we are labeled with different names. Yeah. So let's look at what exactly is UX. the core topic of it. UX is you can read in the screen the abbreviation of it. If I have to simply put it in one word, when you're going to interact with the computer, anything and everything what you're going to create is your watch is going to be a mini computer, your phone is going to be a computer, it could be a desktop, it could be a website. How much you can humanize those elements, and when a person is going to interact with those particular element, how well you can bring in that human interaction into place. So that's simply the terminology what we use in design is human computer interaction. It's basically human and a computer is interacting. UX is probably the gap where you're going to feel that hey, how can I make it more human, how can I make it more relatable. And there are multiple layers to create those kind of experiences. I'll probably talk about it in little bit detail at each layer. One is probably strategy, scope, skeleton, and surface. Probably we'll talk about it in detail in the next set of things. Yeah. So what you often hear this term, right, called UI, UX. What exactly is UI? What exactly is UX? And sometimes you come across the job postings, or you'll have these people termed what is UI and what is UX. So the core understanding is that is UI is a part of UX. UI is the user interface, whatever you're going to create. The difference is when you think of a user experience design, you'll have to think of multiple things hey, how your phone is going to look, which is going to, let's take an example of a phone. How the phone is going to look, what is the size of the phone, that is actually industrial design. When you're going to hold the phone, how heavy it is going to be, how light is going to be, so that is going to be industrial design. Then there's interaction design. Interaction design is nothing but hey, when you're going to click a button, what is going to happen in the next particular screen, how are those interactions connected. Then the button would actually require a visual, your button has to have a certain kind of a color, so then that is a part of visual design. So then there's something content, where you have images, text, data, everything put together. So those all those things put together kind of make the user experience as one core part. So if I have to talk about a real life example, let's say if I have to talk about my company, Amazon, if you'd have seen those delivery guys, wearing those yellow color jackets with that logo and everything, a UX designer's role would come, beyond those screens till that last touch points, what you're designing. The guy who's coming to your home has to be visible. If he's in a faraway place, he has to be visible. He has to stand out with a certain particular color. And how do you build in that particular trust, for when a guy is coming to deliver your product, he has to display that badge. He has to identify himself that he's Amazon guy versus other delivery people who are coming in. So your your user experiences matters to that particular level. And if you look at those boxes, it has to have that Amazon's tape, or it has to have a certain kind of packaging which kind of denotes that it's coming. So you have to take care of all those kind of elements, right from the starting touch point to you have a requirement when you go on a web and search for a particular product, till the last touch point of when you're going to get the product in hand. So all those multiple pointers what you're going to touch upon is actually a user experience part. We often confuse it with only the visuals, which is a screen to screen interaction, which is actually a part of it. But at a larger scope, when you call yourself as a user experience designer, you have to have those multiple elements built in. So there are multiple terminologies that people will call you a service designer, systems designer, and everything. But at the core of it, you would be a user experience designer. Yeah. So these are the core differences. Probably I don't want to go into much detail of talking each and every task, but from a what a UX person does and what a UI person does is kind of put the user experience designer would actually start from user research, research analysis, ideation to execution. Whereas with the UI designer, you would actually be focusing on the interface design, how it is going to look, and how well you're going to visually look, how well it is going to look when a person touches it, what is the color, like, hey, what is the guidelines, what are the things we are going to look at. So yeah. So what is the role of a user experience designer in a large organization or in any organization? So the role of a designer is to basically come up with ideas which addresses the user problems, and to conduct research with users, designing wireframes, mockups, and prototypes. So we often mistake ourselves, like, only those designing mockups and prototypes become the user experience design. Actually, if you go into like larger organizations, like, you have people, like, who don't really contribute or anything on the screen at all. Like, let's say you take up anything in the voice domain, be it Siri, Alexa, or anything. Like, when you're going to be a voice experience designer, you don't have anything tangible. Like, you're actually going to give a certain set of inputs, but how Alexa is going to actually look at, actually going to respond to each and every query. Like, hey, when you're going to say good morning, how it is going to happen. Like, when it's going to say good evening, how it is going to respond. All those things also, like, would be designed by a designer there. Like, they are also called as a designer, but they are called wise user experience designers, or like, VUX we call them. So your as a designer, your core of everything what you're going to do is basically, like, addressing user problems. Like, how are you going to find out the user problem, and how are you going to, like, articulate that problem, then how are you going to come up with a solution for that. So and then this is a common question what you have, like, why you have to start a career in UX design and stuff, like, and I don't have to give an answer to it, like, because where you have seen that, like, as everything what you're going to do, like, is going to either involve a computer or a mobile phone, or anything to do with digital. So, like, it's a very high growth, high demand field, currently, and it is kind of growing. And yeah, so, and we feel that, like, as going forward, more and more this is going to grow, with more time. So I don't know how many of you guys heard of this particular guy called Alan Cooper. So he said this one very beautiful term, like, if you want our users to like our software, we have to design it to behave like a likable person. How do you design a likable person is where, like, you have to bring in the human aspects, to your design. So if you have to be likable, your machine can't talk like a robot. Your machine can't, interact like a robot for you to actually, like, to make it likable. So let's go into a little bit of history of, like, what exactly happened, like, how UX kind of became a more prominent. So I don't know how many of you guys are born before 1982, but in 1982, all the systems, like, if you see all those olden movies or anything and all, the computers would basically look something like this. Like, where you type in a bunch of input, and it kind of throws you a bunch of outputs. Like, so that's how people were interacting with computer. So in 1984, Steve Jobs kind of came up with something called as GUI, like, which is graphic user interface. So that was the first time where, it kind of, like, brought people, like, how they interact with the actual real world were kind of brought in. Like, hey, if you have a desktop, like, you had a trash can, you had your file and folders, then you had your calculators, and you had all those kind of things what you actually keep in a desktop start going into the computer. Like, plus with all the Word, Excel, PowerPoint, like, where all uh, came into picture. Then, like, from there 1984 to right now, if you look at, like, 2020, we have grown leaps and bounds. Like, where our music has kind of come into the come in, like, where we had TV has kind of moved into our screens, messaging, like, camera, photographs, everything has kind of built in, like, compared to what it was there in 1982. So the big difference what you see is actually the user interface. Like, how many of us, like, would be able to use something like this in 1982 versus 1984. Like, it's basically a designer who came, like, who mimicked the real world into the system, and then the world kind of changed. And have you guys heard of this particular guy? Anybody? Like, I can see some comments, but, like, so have you guys heard of this guy, and do you know who he is? Okay. So this particular person is called Dieter Rams, and this is one of his very famous quotes. There are multiple, quotes, there are, and he has come up with his 10 commandments of good design and all. So probably a honest design. Okay, so there's one no, sir. Okay, probably I'll probably explain the next set of things. Honest design communicates solely the function and value it offers. It does not attempt to manipulate buyers and users with promises it can't keep. So anything and everything you're going to design has to kind of set the right expectation. You can't oversell something and expect it to do some wonders. And I asked this guy, now who's this guy? Why am I talking about this guy in design? And why is he important? So he basically designed something called this, which kind of inspired a lot of things what we use today. So this is the pocket radio what he has designed, and which was the base inspiration for the iPod, sorry. Then the calculator what he has designed is actually the calculator which is straight away replicated uh, in the iPhone. And if you look at the the Braun machine whatever he's designed is actually is the Mac what is being kind of copied. So this particular guy, the designer who I initially spoke about, inspired the other guy. I'm damn sure you would know the other guy. uh, you guys, I mean, I hope everybody knows Steve Jobs. So, and this guy changed our lives forever. And how he changed it, I think we spoke about in the earlier slides, and how Apple kind of has a very important role in our everyday day-to-day life, how we interact, how we do things. Yeah. So you and one of the very interesting things to look at the impact of design, the value of design, is basically Steve Jobs was. I mean, some of you might know the history of Steve Jobs. He was thrown away from the company what he had created, and he was out of the company till probably from the period of 1991. I'm not sure about the history. 1991 to 1997. So in 1996, the Apple website looked like this, and in 1997 it looked something like this. And straightforward moved into 1 year. Steve Jobs comes in 1997, and 1998, you see a huge difference of how it kind of the website kind of does, whatever he has launched those days in 1998, is kind of still being used, still being carried forward. Very clean design, very straightforward, photographs. It's very honest, as we recalled in the quote there. He's not trying to oversell anything, if you look at the pre in 1996, you see that Apple power I mean, power payback, there are a lot of things. There's a BMW logo put in the Apple website, and also these are all kind of overselling you with certain things. But when it was launched in 1998, this is how the website kind of looked and this is how it kind of currently looks today. It kind of differs for everyone, but this is how it looked for me today. If you look at it, those black bar what you see in the bottom is being carried forward, is being put up, the search. A lot of things have been carried forward from back then to today. So that kind of makes your design a little timeless. When you're going to design something, when you're going to create the value of design is going to be a lot more. So how do we start, how do we start with basically, when you have to start a design journey, or when you want to design something, how are you going to start? So first is basically you need to understand the design process. So design process is nothing, a very simple 4-step design process, which is basically discover, define, develop, and deliver. Discover is nothing but you're going to talk to your bunch of people around you. Let's say that you are going to work on a problem. You're going to talk to a bunch of people, hey, you're going to make a questionnaire, or you can do it formally, informally, observe people around you, asking hey, why they're performing those set of actions, and what are the problems what they have. Then you're going to come back into the define phase. Define phase is nothing but where you're going to come back with all those observations, the speaking, the talk, whatever you had. You're going to come and document them, and then you're going to make that into a one line story, or insights, or like we call them with different terminologies. It is basically nothing but like from those all those stories what you heard from 10, 15, 20 people, you're going to come here and create a persona or a story or an insight or whatever you're going to create. Then the third phase is going to be called develop is nothing but where you're going to put your heads down, you heard the stories, you heard the problems, now you're documented a persona, now you have kind of got a person, now you have a good understanding of the problem, now you know who's going to use it, now you're going to sit and think on those ideas. Like 90% of the time, if you would have spoken to a lot of people and if you've come and consolidated all the stories one below the other, your ideas will naturally fall into place. From there you're going to move into a place called deliver is where you're going to create your screens. You're going to, I mean, it could be a screen, it could be a prototype. If it is going to be a hardware tool, you're going to create something in the hardware part, then you're going to share it with the world. That's where you're going to deliver your actual project. So then there is something called as evolve is nothing but hey, you've launched something, but right now you have to refine those, how are you going to scale? How are you going to do, next set of things, So the evolve would basically involve all the four phases of what you have done: discover, define, develop, and deliver all over again. But you will be doing it a little bit more condensed way, because you're going to look at one very simple thing. Let's say that, you've come up with the web design, you have launched a website. Now you want to refine it. Now you want to scale it. Now you want to put put 10,000 more users. How do you make it? How do you make more people use your website? So those are the kind of things you're going to look at in the evolve phase. So this is the first part. So the second part is basically something called elements of user experience. I think I briefly touched upon it in the first screen. So I think the design process and elements of user experience are pretty much the same thing what we're going to talk about, but it is just structuring them in a very simple way. First is your base layer is going to be the user needs. You're going to speak to people, you're going to understand what are their problems, what is the objective. Let's say that you're building an app, what are the questions when you're going to, is there a real need to even create that particular product? Let's say that if somebody's going to create a calculator, there are already so many calculators available in the market. How is your calculator going to be different? If you have to create a different calculator for your particular requirement, then you'll have to go out and ask people what are the problems they have with the current calculator. From there you're going to get your requirements, which is the user needs, and what is your objective of it. Your objective of a calculator is going to be to solve user problems. So the second layer is the second layer is going to be the functional specification and the content requirement. Function specifications is nothing but let's say that you're going to design this calculator. Either it's going to be for the phone, it's going to be for the desktop, or is it going to be used in a tablet, or is it going to be used in the watch, and what can be done. So those are those functional specifications. Then your content requirements is basically, hey, what kind of content you're going to put in, what kind of language it's going to go into, what are the kind of requirements what it has. Let's say that you have your for a calculator, you would require a logic, you would require xyz other things when building. So then the third layer is basically the interaction layer and the information architecture. When I'm going to come into the app, when I'm going to come into the calculator, so let's say that hey, how am I going to operate the calculator on the phone, when I touch when it touches a particular button, what has to happen, so versus should I have auto save in my functionality, or versus a manual save, those are the kind of things what you're going to look at. So then the interface design, navigation design, information design. So the fourth layer is basically the interface design, where the UI part what we spoke on, hey, as a interface designer, how my interface is going to look, how am I going to navigate. I have calculator, I have saved a bunch of calculations already. How am I going to navigate through them? Is it going to be through a hamburger? Is it going to be through bottom part or anything? So then your topmost is going to be the visual design. Visual design is basically hey, I have a calculator, I have these functional things, I have this information and everything. Now it has to look good. Now it has to talk to me in a particular language. My enter button has to be in a certain color. My what do you say, my plus button has to be, in a certain way, like, what button needs to be big, what button needs to be small. So those are the kind of calls what you're going to take in your visual design layer. So this is a little detailed explanation of what are the elements of user experiences. Yeah, so then these are the basics of design, what you would kind of have to know when you're going to design something. These are the kind of things, where a lot of times you would hear things like, hey, can we increase the line spacing, can we increase the value of it, can we increase the size. So these are some basic terminologies what as a designer you need to kind of understand. Like, one is basically line is very simple, straightforward to explain. What is the shape? Value is basically like, how light or dark it is and how much space it is going to occupy. What is the texture you're going to put in the background, and what is the sizes of it. So these might sound very very basic and very simple, but these are the terminologies what you predominantly use in your day-to-day design systems. So then there is you will hear these things like, contrast, repetition, proximity, alignment, so these are very simple terms. If anybody has used PowerPoint or anything, by default you would be doing all this, in one way or the other without knowing these terminologies. Because when you're going to design something, people are going to use these kind of languages for you. So let's say that you designed an app, somebody will come and say, hey, the alignment is not really looking good. So when you're going to design something, hey, I'm not able to see the difference between two buttons, which is the contrast of it. So then what are the soft skills required? The soft skills is basically nothing but, you can pick it up. If you know PowerPoint, you'll be able to pick up 70 to 60 to 70% of the software is very, very easy, very, very straightforward. Currently, I mean when I was initially making the presentation, there were two different things, of one for design and one for prototyping. But Figma, and Figma and XD kind of builds those two things together. Yeah. So what are the kind of iOS and Android guidelines? So why these are important? Basically, iOS and Android guidelines is basically, let's say that you're going to create something. Let's say you're going to create an app. As a designer, you don't really have the time and money to kind of go create your own set of things. You could leverage these available assets. You could leverage these patterns already existing patterns to create your design. This kind of becomes a very great starting point for you guys also to understand how 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 designers in iOS and Android have kind of thought about these things. When you go into material design guidelines, you have very, very detailed level guidelines of how you have to design sound, how you have to design interactions, how do you have to design layers. So those kind of very interesting details are there, that kind of gives you a lot of interesting components and building blocks to build your journey. I would say, if you guys are starting, or if you guys are thinking of, of building anything for your hackathon or for anything, it would be much better if you use some of the existing ones to actually do. So you would kind of do away with sitting and creating a lot of things by from scratch. You could leverage this and you could build on it. If you look at the best apps in iOS and Android, they're all built with very, very straightforward guidelines from right from there. And I have this one other small video by Apple. So before I start the video, so one of the very interesting things is, when you hear a lot of these kind of information, people kind of get a little disheartened, hey, it's a little complex field, it's a little new for me, is it really in for me and all. But this kind of video explains why, how can, I mean, this kind of talks about the philosophy of how you would, when you're going to actually start design, what are the kind of things you're going to go through. Yeah, so I'll just play. So this is one very interesting point. For every 1,000 S's, you're gonna say, like for every 1,000 no's, you'll have one yes. So that's one thing. And when you're gonna start something, obviously, it will not be so great, but as you keep doing, as you keep going at the process, you'll eventually get there. So, and this is the common question what I get asked, in every place. So I've added a slide to it. Where are the jobs? Do we get jobs? The second most important question what I get is, you know, what are the salaries? So I've added a slide for that. This is not from me. This is from LinkedIn, and all this is all is currently what is being paid. So, and what are the salaries across the world? Some people, again, this is one other question what I get asked, hey, what are the salaries being paid across, the world? US, the average is around 85,000 USDs, which is on par with, which is actually equal or more to the entry level software engineers what they pay. And I mean it's across in every country has a average. Yeah, so I'll probably drop this slide deck with you guys. You can look into the links and Q&A if you guys have any questions.
Okay, sorry, I think I wasn't audible. I'm so sorry. Yeah, okay, so we have a few questions from the chat. We have Mr. Brightside. He's asking, so do you need to be artistically inclined to be a UI designer?
No, not really. If if you have a lot of curiosity, you can become a designer. So that's all I would say. Artisticness is not really required. It's probably for fine arts you might require it, but for as a designer, what you would require a lot more is a lot of logical thinking, and then a uh, lot of basically understand. I mean, observing. If you're curious and if you're able to observe things around you, you would be able to apply those uh, thoughts much better. So artisticness is kind of a skill, I think, which can be developed over a period of time. If you look at my organization, if you look at my where I work, we are a team of 45 people, out of which probably 10 people would be from the design background. The 30 people who are from engineering are from different backgrounds, and all of them are doing design. So
Right. So we have Mead Zen. He's asking, how do your work cross-functionally with developers, coders, etc. in a company as a team?
okay, so just give me a moment. Can you just repeat the question?
How do you work cross-functionally with developers, coders, etc. in a company as in a team? So how does a designer work with a team?
Okay,
What are
okay.
his roles? I think
So,
that's what he
okay.
means.
So, in especially in Amazon, Microsoft, and all the places where I've worked, your design actually starts with all of them together. So developers, coders, product managers, business leads, everybody come together when you're going to actually start a project. So your brainstorming, your first set of brainstorming, what I spoke about, actually starts from with them. So they actually you start the journey with them, then you kind of then you kind of diverge into your paths. So they will talk about their set of problems, their set of limitations, what they have. So then you would kind of try to so the core of it is going to be always going to be the users, what are the user needs and things are going to be, and those point of views as a designer you would be bringing in. And from probably from the developers and coders, whatever you're going to talk about, they're going to come up with their set of limitations, or the tech limitations, or what can be done when you're going to come up with a solution. So that's how it kind of starts. So we say that it always starts with a storytelling session of hey, this is the kind of user, this is the requirement, this is how the persona is going to be. Then everybody around would kind of help you brainstorm on those ideas.
Right.
I hope I answered your question.
We have a next question. What are some of the biggest trends in UX design industry right now?
What are the biggest trends in UX industries right now? Frankly speaking, I don't know. So why I say that is see, as a UX designer, right? Trends would keep coming and going every year. It's like your English type, So I don't know. When I was in college, we had this thing called SMS lingo. We used to shorten the words and then speak
Right, right.
every we used to replace all the things with R and everything. But so then there were emojis, then there's a different kind of a lingo which is common, but your basic English grammar kind of stays. When you're going to write an email, when you're going to write a letter, or when you're going to write anything, it's going to remain the same. So as the designer, are not just here, I think for any industry, not just UX design, for anybody for that matter, it's very important for you guys to understand the basics, understanding the grammar, how you're going to do what is going to be applied over a period of time. I'll tell you a very interesting story what my manager had showed. So when he was
Right,
actually
right.
started his career in 1999, so he said all the designs, the web design, basically whatever he was doing was actually had to be hand drawn. So he
Oh,
had
okay.
to hand draw all the drawings, then take it to a developer. He would look at those drawings with those specifications, like your architecture diagram, then code them into a website. Okay, so the measurements, the sizes, whatever is there, it's the same thing currently also. If you look at any design software or anything for that matter, like that time he was actually using a T scale to actually draw those things and go give it to a developer. If you look at it right now, the same thing is actually on a artboard in a digital screen. The core of your design skills are not going to change. So what is going to be the hierarchy of the design, what is going to be you know uh, how your language is going to be, where your button is going to be placed, hey, what
Right.
color your button is going to be in. So those kind of things are going to be the same, across the years, across everywhere you're going to see, the I mean, one very interesting thing is the hyperlink color is blue. It has been blue for probably past 20 years. There's nobody found a trend to probably put a. So you will have all these trends coming in, but I would say focus more on understanding the core of it, and trends would come and go. Some years, you'll have a dark pattern, some years you'll have a light pattern, some years you'll have purple coming into picture. It kind of differs. So yeah.
Okay, so we'll move to the next question. Um, we have best resources to learn design.
Okay. So best resources to learn design. So I can drop in a bunch of links. Just give me a minute. I'll actually freeze it on the link screen. So are you guys able to see? I'll see if I can drop this in the chat as well. So, so this is more focused towards UX design. I don't know whether I'll be able to comment or not. So
Sure, we'll put it from your end, not an issue.
yeah, I'll just drop a bunch of links, and I think You guys can. I'll just keep the link screen open. So probably, so you can start off with Smashing Magazine. That was one of the good resources what I found, like from the time I started. So then there is something called A List Apart, like where I actually go every now and then to read about stuff. So you can start off with that. Then there are, I mean, if you Google, there are plenty of resources, what could work. But probably these two are my favorites. One is A List Apart and Smashing Magazine are these two are. I found that consistently, they keep updating the their content, and the standard of the content is also very good. Yeah.
Okay, so next we have Ishita Kedia. She's asking, is it necessary to have a degree in UI UX design to be a designer, I think.
No, not necessary. If you I don't think a design degree is very different than a UI UX degree. And we don't have many such certifications also available because the field itself is not very matured. It's probably 5 to 7 years into the field, so we don't have such kind of very strong companies. I mean, I would say just start designing, and start interacting with fellow designers or people you find on the internet, and just have a good portfolio. Actually, what matters a lot. Actually, one very interesting thing is, as a design, if you're coming for design interviews, hardly anybody asks you about your design degree. So there's something called as design portfolio what we look at. So we look at only the
Right,
design
right.
portfolios. Like the degrees what you're going to have is actually going to be for your document verification purposes. So your portfolio going to be going to matter a lot more than your actual design degrees.
Right. So we'll move on to our next question. Our next question is, how do we build trust within the user through experience?
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting question. So one is basically you should not overpromise a lot of things. What happens is, and then you should not hide a lot of things. So let's say that when you're going to come into a sign up flow, if it is going to be 16 pages, it is much better if you say that, hey, one of 16. Then you're kind of set up those things, for him. You've set this pitch and the field for him. Being as honest as possible in the design is what actually going to help you build the trust. And how do you build trust is basically, you know uh, setting the right set of expectations. When you're going to create anything, what is this particular flow going to do? And then having a very high due diligence of what is going to go in screen, anything and everything which is going to be extra, which is going to break the trust. So
Right, sir. Okay, so we have our next question. How research plays an integral part in design.
okay. So research is basically a core of everything what you're going to do. So research is basically going to give you those initial set of stories what you're going to tell. The research is basically going to give you your user requirements. Without understanding the user, there is no experience you'll be able to create. So research kind of helps you understand the user. Hey, where is this particular guy from? Let's take an example of, let's say you're creating an accounting software. Hey, is accounting software, who's this particular guy who's going to use your product? How old is he? What is his proficiency with the computer? Does he know your native language? Is he an English speaker, or is he a regional language speaker? you know and I mean, how big is particular screen going to be? All that is going to matter a lot. All those information you will be able to get from the research. Without doing the research, if you're directly going to jump in, you would be assuming a lot of things. Then you would actually have to go and do research after your design is kind of complete. So so, design research kind of plays as a starting point for you to start your process.
Okay. Before we move on to the next question, make sure to answer the giveaway questions to win exciting prizes. And they're right below. And make sure to answer in the chat box so that we're able to recognize people who have answered. And now we'll move to the next question. Um, how does one start making real world projects in graphic designing?
Okay, how does one start making real world projects in graphic designing? So I don't really understand what I mean the real world projects. So I don't know, like, one of the very good ways to start off with is actually, like, you have your hackathons, and, like, you have your college events and everything, to start with. Or one other thing, what I had picked up when I was in college was I was looking at all those social causes, you know, and then, like, there are a lot of competition which has been put out, like, you can start designing for them, so that would kind of give you those real world projects. But as a if you're not working in a company, like, the access to those real world projects are going to be a lot lesser. But I think there are a lot of projects currently. If you look at, like, there are a lot of companies, and even government kind of puts out those kind of requests, so to design those collaterals, to design those awareness camping and things like that. So I hope I answered your question.
Right, sir. So next question's from Prema. Does India have a good scope for UI UX in the future, and how is it currently?
Oh, it has a lot of scope for UI UX, because what happened is, I think, it was a little slow, like, to be honest, 2017, 18, like, because we had a lot of designers, and then, like, we had enough, like, the the commerce and the digital aspects were not really given that much importance in India in that particular phase. I think pandemic has fast forwarded everything. Like now everything has moved to digital. With now every service, everything what you're gonna do is actually gonna be digital. You're gonna book your, you know, train tickets to, flight tickets to everything has moved. It was happening at a very slower pace. When you're gonna, we had this study, I think I had come across a couple of years back when I was in Microsoft. The grocery penetration in India was 1%, in 2017, 18, around that particular time. Now I think it has crossed. I mean, I was reading other day in the newspaper, it crossed around 5 to 10%. 5 to 10% of people in India actually started buying groceries online. Whereas in before the pandemic it was 1%. So so that is a huge change. When you look at uh, like the scope of it, it is just one sector I'm talking about. There are multiple other sectors, your haircuts have gone online, because saloons are closed, now you have to rely on urban club to come and cut your hair. Like, how are you going to book a slot? How are you going to do all that? So all this is, there's going to be, UX and the digital products are going to play a very important role in it. And uh, and one of the very interesting things about UX is that is every company kind of provide these services. Like I was working in ClearTrip. I think the only differentiator for ClearTrip was the design what they had. So they didn't really, like, the flight tickets. If you're going to search in like Make My Trip, Yatra, all these other sites in ClearTrip, the only differentiator what they had is actually the design aspect of what ClearTrip was providing. Like, the prices were the same. Now where the users are going to go, if the prices are going to be the same, now the user is actually going to go into a place where the experience is going to be better, right? So there's a lot of scope
Right.
for UI currently. Yeah.
Okay, so our next question is, do you think that development like app and web help us to
Mhm.
automatically inculcate the process of designing?
Do you think development like app and web help us automatically inculcate the process of designing? It does to a certain extent. But what happens with when you're going into the development pipeline, especially the my I have my schoolmates, who are kind of switching from development to design or anything, and they're called this full stack designers. You would have heard this term called full stack designers.
Right, right, right.
Basically, they do development as well as design and stuff. So they often stop themselves thinking a little wild, because their in their head, the limitations of tech is going to be at a X level. I would suggest that, sticking to one particular field, would actually help you go deeper in those areas. Development is also a very wonderful thing. We have very, very less people, doing the sheer volume of requirement, and the developers available are also very less. So you can go it into one particular field. But what happens here is, you would often stop yourself from going a little wild and thinking on those next level, next aspirable ideas because of the technological limitations. Probably doing one thing would help. I hope. Yeah, if you guys don't agree with the answers, also you guys can re-ask those questions.
Right. So our next question, uh, is it important for a UX designer to know coding?
I don't know coding, so frankly speaking, it's not. I mean, it's good to know certain basics of it. It helps you communicate with your developers and coders a little better, but it is not necessary that you have to learn those full fledged coding, prototyping, and stuff. When somebody tells you when at a very basic level HTML is enough, and that can be picked up looking at YouTube videos. I picked up coding because I didn't come from engineering background nor I studied coding anytime, so I picked up a lot of
Right.
things out of I mean, especially just to understand the language. When somebody tells you, hey, this is a syntax and this is what needs to be changed, or something like a very simple string change if you have to do, so those kind of things, you can easily pick up from looking at YouTube and stuff like that. And I mean, very basic level is enough. Yeah.
Right. I think that wraps up our questions, I think.
Yeah.
We'll wait for a few seconds. If any of you have any more questions, you can ask us. Uh, Sir, any final advice you'd like to give our viewers? Like, assuming that all of them are first, second, third year students in an engineering college, what would
Mhm.
be your advice to them to become future designers?
So one is first is basically when you're going to look at any particular app or anything for that matter, just take a moment. I mean, if you're going to pursue design as a career or anything, just break down that app and see how they would have come up with a certain kind of logic or a certain kind of a scenario, and
Right,
then if you I mean, this is one activity what we do is that hey, you basically list down top three of your favorite apps and then study them in detail. That's your first exercise what you're going to do. Let's say that you like something like Spotify, Instagram, or or any other app, whatever of your choice, or book my show for that matter. Just probably take a screenshot of it and just study what they have done, how those micro interactions, what are the smaller things what they've done, what are the things they've kept, what are those things which makes you like them, basically you like them for a certain reason, right? Basically find
right,
that
right,
particular reason why you like a particular app, so then probably you will go deeper, as you start asking those questions, why do you like a app, that itself would kind of give you a lot of answers. And the same way, and then the same question can be asked for why you don't like a certain app or a experience or a certain thing, so is it the color, is it the experience, or is it going to take a lot of time? I also have my set of favorite apps, and I also have my set of apps which I really don't so
Oh, I think somebody has asked one final question. So we'll keep
yeah.
this as the final question for the day. Do you ever face any disagreements between the design and the development teams? If so, how did you deal with it?
So if so that's what I say, if people don't disagree with you, then that means you're not making progress. So disagreements are good. First is you'll have to understand where the disagreement is coming from. Is it a limitation on the tech, or is it a limitation on the logic, or is it something what we have not thought about? First is be humble about saying that, yeah, this is a problem and this needs to be acknowledged. First is acknowledge that this is happened because of a particular reason, right? Acknowledge the fact, hey, this is a reason, and look at it from both the perspectives. As a designer, you would have a certain logic for your particular XYZ design or an argument what you've come up with, and as a developer, they would have their own set of things. So sometimes we come across this on day-to-day basis. So what we do is we put them together on a board, and we basically say hey, these are the plus points of my particular design, and these are the minus points of my particular design, and we talk about it and resolve it that way. So basically, if you start writing down your disagreements itself, like that itself kind of gives you clarity on how do you come up with resolutions. So
Right, sir. So with this, we'll wrap it up. We'd like to
yeah.
thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedule and coming here with us. Um, a little announcement about our hack. Stay tuned. We have another session coming up with Cleve Moeller. He's the inventor of MATLAB, and he's going to be here with us soon. So stay tuned. And our ideation phase ends on 8th of April, 11:59 p.m. So make sure to submit your ideas before that. If you haven't formed a team, you can join on the Discord link given below and form a team for yourselves. If you have a team, make sure to submit your idea. All the best, and thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you, everyone.